The whispers of the North Sea. The wind, a constant, biting companion in the northern lands, whipped through the gaps in the longhouse walls, carrying with it the salty tang of the North Sea. Here, life was etched in stark lines. The raw power of the ocean, the unforgiving bite of winter, and the unyielding grip of the laws laid down by the chieftains. Justice, or what passed for it, was swift and often brutal, a necessary deterrent in a world where survival hinged on order. Tales of such swiftness were woven into the very fabric of their evenings. Tonight, the crackling fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the faces of the villagers gathered. Leif, small for his 10 years, huddled closer to Grandpa Eric, his eyes wide, reflecting the leaping flames. The elder Skald, a man with a voice like grinding stones, was recounting the fate of a thieving thrall. And the blood eagle, carved into his back, spread his lungs like wings for the gulls to feast upon. He rasped, his eyes gleaming with a practiced menace. A collective shiver ran through the assembled, a thrill of fear that Leif felt deep in his own belly. He imagined the thrall's screams, lost to the wind, a chilling whisper from the very depths of the fjord. He pictured the sharp, cold edge of the blade, the slow, agonizing separation of bone and flesh. Grandpa Eric, however, merely stroked Leif's hair, his gaze fixed on the fire, not the storyteller. Later, as the longhouse quieted and the embers glowed like watchful eyes, Leif whispered, "Grandpa, were they truly so cruel?" Eric hummed a low, thoughtful sound. He smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, a comforting scent. Cruelty, Leif, is a quick path to a hollow heart. Fear can enforce a law, yes, but it doesn't build a strong community. A strong community is built on trust, on fairness, and on understanding. He paused, his gaze meeting Leif's. Imagine, Leif, if that thrall had stolen because his children starved. Would the blood eagle truly bring justice then, or merely more suffering? Leif frowned, the image of the thralls screaming fading, replaced by the starving children. But the law says thieves are punished. Indeed, Eric agreed, his voice gentle but firm. And laws are important. But the spirit of a law, Leif, is found not in its harshness, but in its wisdom. A truly wise judgment seeks to mend what is broken, not merely to break it further. Remember that, my boy. Kindness, even in the face of wrong, can be a far more potent weapon than any axe. He patted Leif's hand. Now sleep. The whispers of the North Sea will carry your dreams. A missing treasure. The scent of roasted boar and simmering berry compote hung thick in the crisp autumn air, a fragrant promise of the coming revelry. Children, their faces smeared with dirt and excitement, chased each other through the village square, their laughter echoing against the stout timber walls of the longhouses. Women, their arms laden with fresh baked bread and pitchers of potent mead, bustled between homes, adding their own cheerful chatter to the growing din. Even the usually stoic warriors, their axes propped against the feast hall's entrance, shared an easy camaraderie, their voices a low rumble of anticipation. Leif, perched on a weathered barrel near the blacksmith's forge, watched it all, a small smile playing on his lips. The annual harvest feast was always a sight to behold, a vibrant tapestry of community and celebration. His gaze drifted to the chieftain's table, laden with delicacies and adorned with the clan's most prized possessions. There, amidst the polished, drinking horns and intricate carvings, rested the ancestral silver brooch, its knotwork design catching the afternoon sun. It was a symbol of their heritage, passed down through generations of chieftains, a beacon of their shared history. Suddenly, a piercing cry ripped through the festive atmosphere, silencing the laughter and stilling the hurried footsteps. It's gone. The brooch, it's missing. Leif's heart lurched. Chieftain Ragnar, a man whose roar was legendary and temper equally so, stood at the head of his table, his face a mask of furious disbelief. His large hands, usually grasping a formidable axe, now clenched into white-knuckled fists. The silver brooch, which had glinted so brightly moments ago, was indeed nowhere to be seen. A wave of unease rippled through the gathered villagers, the cheerful mood replaced by a palpable dread. Ragnar's voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous growl that carried over the hushed crowd. Someone among you has stolen a piece of our very soul. This is not a common theft. It is an insult to our ancestors, a betrayal of our trust. His eyes, usually warm and mirthful during feasts, now blazed with icy fury. Find a thief and bring them before me. If the brooch is not returned by sunup tomorrow, the punishment will be of a kind that will make the gods themselves weep. Let all who hear me know, the consequences will be dire, beyond anything this village has ever witnessed. The decree hung heavy in the air, a cold shadow cast over the vibrant preparations. Leif felt a shiver trace its way down his spine. The feast, once a source of joy, now felt like a prelude to something truly terrible. Accused and afraid, a hush fell over the gathering, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet. The elder, a man whose voice usually boomed like distant thunder, now spoke in a low, gravelly tone that somehow amplified the tension. Someone amongst us has taken what is not theirs. The sacred horn, a gift from the gods, is gone. His gaze swept across the faces, lingering for a fraction too long on Bjorn. Bjorn, whose usual posture was a slight slump, seemed to shrink further, his shoulders hunching as if to disappear into the rough weave of his tunic. He fumbled with the leather cord around his neck, his eyes wide and unfocused. When the elder's finger finally pointed directly at him, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "Bjorn," the elder accused, his voice rising, "you were seen near the shrine last night, after the feast. What say you?" A tremor ran through Bjorn. His face, usually pale, flushed a patchy red. "No, I didn't. I went for water, elder." My stomach was unsettled. His words tumbled out, a frantic, jumbled mess, punctuated by a frantic shake of his head. He looked like a cornered rabbit, his large, gentle eyes darting from face to face, pleading for someone to believe him. A few villagers murmured their agreement with the elder, their gazes hardening. Bjorn's clumsiness was a known fact, his shyness often mistaken for shiftiness by those who didn't know him well. Leif felt a knot tighten in his gut. He knew Bjorn. He'd seen him trip over his own feet carrying a single log, drop a freshly caught fish back into the river from sheer nervousness, and blush scarlet at the mention of a girl's name. Bjorn was many things, but a thief. It didn't sit right. He remembered Grandpa Eric's words, a low rumble from just a few days prior. A man's nature is carved into his spirit, Leif. Look beyond the fumbling hands and the quiet tongue. Look at the heart. He watched Bjorn's terror-stricken face, the genuine panic in his eyes. There was no cunning there, no hint of deceit. Just raw, unadulterated fear. The accusations were coming faster now, a crescendo of suspicion building around the boy. Leif's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew Bjorn was innocent, or at least that he couldn't be this kind of guilty. The unease in Leif's stomach wasn't just the lingering chill of the morning. It was a deeper, unsettling dread that something fundamentally wrong was about to happen. Leif's secret search. The image of Bjorn, pale and trembling before the chieftain's unyielding gaze, gnawed at Leif. He knew Bjorn, knew the boy's clumsy nature, his perpetual shyness, his aversion to anything resembling conflict. Bjorn wasn't cunning, wasn't malicious. The accusation of stealing the ceremonial axe, a relic of such profound importance, felt utterly wrong. A cold dread settled in Leif's gut, not just for Bjorn, but for the stark injustice looming over him. He couldn't simply stand by and watch. Leif decided, with a quiet resolve that surprised even himself, that he would find the truth. He began his investigation subtly, a shadow flitting among the bustling longhouse. While others discussed Bjorn's impending doom, Leif circled the chieftain's raised platform, his eyes scanning every crevice, every discarded scrap. He imagined the scene from the previous night, the feast winding down, the guards growing lax, the flicker of torchlight playing tricks on tired eyes. He pictured Bjorn, perhaps sent on an errand, stumbling past, completely oblivious. Leif lowered himself to hands and knees, peering under benches, tracing the path from the chieftain's carved seat to the storage chest where the axe had been kept. The rush mats, woven with intricate geometric patterns, were thick, concealing much. He noticed a faint disturbance in the dust near the chest. A small scuff mark, deeper than a casual boot, almost as if something heavy had been dragged. Not a footprint, but a gouge. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from the far end of the longhouse. Leif straightened up quickly, feigning interest in a conversation nearby. The chieftain's elite guards, burly men with weathered faces and heavy axes slung over their backs, were moving with purpose. They began to dismantle a section of the longhouse wall, revealing a stout wooden post. Another guard, his movements practiced and grim, produced a coil of thick rope, its fibers rough and unyielding. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken promise of a swift, brutal judgment. Leif's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Time was slipping away, like grains of sand through an open palm. He had to find something, anything, before the sun reached its zenith. The shiny button. The crisp morning air bit at Leif's exposed ears, a stark contrast to the stifling tension that still clung to the great hall like smoke from a dying fire. He'd woken early, a knot of unease twisting in his stomach, and found himself drawn back to the scene of the previous night's horror. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but the chieftain's table, where the gruesome discovery had been made, lay largely undisturbed, save for a few stray splinters from the overturned benches. Leif knelt, his worn tunic brushing against the packed earth. His eyes, usually darting with youthful energy, were now narrowed, scanning every pebble, every discarded scrap of food, as if searching for a forgotten secret. The ground was cold and damp beneath his calloused fingertips. He moved slowly, methodically, tracing a path around the chieftain's overturned chair, then fanning out in ever-widening circles. The aroma of stale mead and fear still lingered, making his nose wrinkle. He pushed aside a patch of trampled straw, revealing a dark stain that made his breath catch. He carefully avoided it, his gaze sweeping onward. A glint of light, almost imperceptible in the muted dawn, caught his eye. It wasn't the dull gleam of a fallen coin or the shimmer of a stray shard of pottery. This was different. He reached out, his fingers brushing against something small, smooth, and surprisingly ornate. He picked it up, turning it over in his palm. It was a button no bigger than his thumbnail, fashioned from polished silver. Its surface wasn't plain. Intricate knotwork, finely etched, swirled across its face, catching the limited light and reflecting it in miniature bursts. The craftsmanship was exquisite, far too refined for the rough-spun garments worn by most villagers. Bjorn, Leif knew, favored simple, sturdy clothes, his buttons typically carved from bone or wood, functional and unadorned. This button was a statement, a flourish of wealth and status. Leif's heart gave a sudden lurch. Bjorn would never wear something like this. This wasn't Bjorn's. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, scattering the lingering doubts about his friend's guilt. A small, shiny button, out of place and out of character, had just opened a crack in the solid wall of accusation. A new lead, a thread, perhaps, to unravel the whole dreadful tapestry. He clutched it tightly, the cold metal warming against his skin. A tricky memory. Leif rotated the ornate button in his palm, its polished gold gleaming faintly in the lamplight. It possessed an unexpected heft, cool against his skin, and the intricate knotwork carved into its surface spoke of undeniable expense. Far too grand for a simple villager's tunic. He'd encountered countless buttons throughout his life. Plain wooden discs, practical bone toggles, even the dull bronze fastenings on more prosperous farmers' cloaks. But nothing like this. Where had he encountered such a distinctive piece of finery before? The memory hovered, a phantom whisper just beyond reach. He conjured images of the bustling market, its vibrant stalls and cacophonous voices. Closing his eyes, he tried to pinpoint specific faces, particular garments. The baker, perpetually dusted with flour. The weaver, threads clinging to his sleeves, the fishmonger forever smelling of the sea. None aligned. This button proclaimed wealth, a certain flamboyant exhibition of it. Not the quiet affluence of chieftain, but something flashier. Then it coalesced, like a tumble stone settling into its groove. The trader, not one of the familiar, honest merchants who regularly visited the village, but a newcomer who had passed through only days prior. Leif remembered him vividly, not solely for his unusually smooth tongue and haggling prowess, but for his flamboyant attire. He'd been a blur of rich, dark fabrics, his coat seeming to shimmer even under the overcast sky. And on that coat, catching a fleeting sunbeam, had been a row of buttons. Buttons precisely like this one, gleaming and ostentatious. The trader, Leif recalled, had boasted of rare silks and exotic spices, but his eyes had held a shifty glint, constantly scanning the crowd. He'd seemed overly eager to please, too quick with a flattering word. Yet beneath the veneer of joviality, a calculating sharpness resided. Leif had dismissed it then, attributing it to the nature of some traders, always seeking an edge. Now, a cold prickle of suspicion began to snake its way up his spine. Why would such a button lie near the scene of a crime? Why would a wealthy, transient trader, a man with no village ties, carelessly drop something so valuable? Unless he had been present, not as an innocent passerby, but as something far more sinister. The pieces began to interlock, forming a chilling pattern. The trader's honeyed words, his brief presence, his expensive, distinctive coat. It was all too convenient, too coincidental. Leif clutched the button tighter, its cool weight now feeling less like a clue and more like a heavy accusation. Wisdom and courage. The scent of wood smoke and dried herbs clung to Grandpa Eric's small, tidy hut. Leif stood just inside the doorway, the polished iron button clutched in his sweaty palm. Sunlight, filtered through a small window, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, but Leif's gaze was fixed on his grandfather, who sat mending a fishing net by the hearth. The rhythmic click-clack of the bone needle was the only sound. Grandpa, Leif's voice was a whisper, barely audible above the crackling fire. Eric looked up, his kind eyes, usually crinkled with good humor, now held a patient inquiry. "Aye, Leif, what troubles your mind, little raven?" Leif took a deep breath, stepping further into the warmth. He held out his hand, revealing the button. "I found this, by the old gallows, and I saw something. Someone, I think." He then launched into his story, the words tumbling out in a rush. The unusual figure in the twilight, the strange way he'd seen him drop the button, the lingering feeling of unease. He spoke of the injustice he felt for the accused, the way the chieftain seemed too quick to condemn. Grandpa Eric listened, his face a canvas of changing expressions. Concern flickered in his eyes, then a quiet understanding. He didn't interrupt, merely nodded, his gaze never leaving Leif's earnest face. When Leif finished, the silence returned, heavier now. Eric took the button, turning it over in his weathered fingers. The iron gleamed dully. "You believe someone is trying to trick the chieftain, to make it seem as though people are guilty when they are not." Eric's voice was soft, but the question was sharp, penetrating. Leif met his grandfather's gaze, his fear momentarily forgotten. "Yes, Grandpa. It doesn't feel right. The chieftain is wise, but he trusts what he sees. If someone is making him see lies," a slow smile spread across Eric's face, a rare sight of deep pride. "That takes courage, Leif, to question what is, and to seek what is true, even when it is difficult." He rose, placing a hand on Leif's shoulder. "This button and your tale, they speak of a deeper deceit than any of us imagined. The chieftain will need to hear this, and he will need to hear it from someone he trusts." Leif's heart hammered. "You'll tell him?" he asked, a mix of hope and trepidation in his voice. "Aye, Leif, we will tell him. Together." Eric's grip on his grandson's shoulder tightened reassuringly. Truth has a way of finding the light, even in the darkest corners. And justice, Leif, is a debt owed to all. Justice revealed. The chieftain's long hall buzzed with a nervous energy that seemed to thicken the air. Leif, clutching Grandpa Eric's tunic, felt his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Bjorn, slumped against the guard post, looked even smaller and paler under the harsh scrutiny of the villagers. Grandpa Eric stepped forward, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the murmuring. "Chieftain, with your permission, I present new evidence regarding the accusation against Bjorn." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "My grandson, Leif, observed something peculiar at the market. He noticed a loose button on the tricky trader's tunic, one that looked identical to a button found near the overturned stall. With a gentle hand, he produced the polished bone button, holding it aloft for all to see. It glinted faintly in the torchlight. Leif swallowed hard, the chieftain's gaze fixed on him. The trader, he kept touching it, almost like he was trying to hide it. "Chieftain," Leif managed, his voice a reedy whisper. And when he left, it wasn't there anymore. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. The chieftain's eyes, usually stern, narrowed in thought. He turned to his guards. "Fetch the tricky trader." Immediately, the guards moved with swift purpose, their heavy boots thudding on the packed earth floor. Minutes later, the trader was dragged into the hall, his usual swagger replaced by a sickly pallor. He tried to protest, to bluster, but the chieftain held up a hand, silencing him. "Is this your button, merchant?" the chieftain asked, his voice low and dangerous, indicating the button in Grandpa Eric's palm. The trader's eyes darted frantically, first to the button, then to Leif, then to the angry faces of the villagers. His bravado crumbled. A shudder ran through him, and he finally collapsed to his knees, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes," he choked out, his voice barely audible. "It is mine. I tripped, and the goods fell. Bjorn had nothing to do with it." A collective gasp, then a roar of relief and approval, erupted from the villagers. Bjorn, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope, looked up. The guards unchained him, and he stumbled forward, blinking in the sudden freedom. He was no longer a condemned man. Cheers echoed through the hall, a joyous cacophony. Grandpa Eric smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Leif's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the bravery that had brought truth to light. Justice, at last, had been revealed. A lesson learned. The crisp morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and pine, but Leif felt none of the usual chill. A warmth bloomed in his chest as Bjorn, still a little pale, approached him, eyes wide and glistening. "Leif," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the village's awakening murmurs. "Thank you. Truly. I didn't know what would happen." Bjorn's hands, usually fidgeting, were clasped tightly together, a silent testament to his relief. Leif simply nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He understood the unspoken fear that had gripped Bjorn, the terror of facing the chieftain's wrath without a voice. Later that day, before the midday meal, the chieftain stood on the raised platform in the village square, his gaze sweeping across the assembled villagers. A hush fell, anticipation thick in the air. Yesterday, the chieftain's voice boomed, clear and resonant. A grave injustice nearly occurred. Accusations were made, and swift judgment was almost passed. His eyes found Leif's, a glint of respect within their depths. But one amongst us, young Leif, did not let the clamor silence his observations. He sought the truth, not merely the easiest path. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Many shifted uncomfortably, remembering their quick condemnations of Bjorn. Grandpa Eric, standing beside Leif, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The chieftain continued, "It is easy to point fingers in anger, to condemn without understanding. But true strength, true justice, comes not from the loudest voice, nor the quickest accusation. It comes from patience, from observation, and from the courage to speak for what is right, even when it is difficult." He raised his hand, gesturing towards Leif. Leif's actions remind us all, kindness, a keen eye, and the pursuit of truth are our greatest shields. He has saved an innocent, and for that, he is celebrated. A cheer erupted, hearty and genuine this time, directed at Leaf. He felt a blush creep up his neck, and used to such open praise. He glanced at Grandpa Eric, who offered a warm, proud smile. The weight of the moment settled upon Leaf, the understanding that his quiet curiosity, his seemingly small voice, had averted a terrible wrong. He thought of Bjorn's frightened eyes, of the chieftain's unwavering gaze, and realized that the greatest lessons were often learned not through grand battles, but through the quiet courage of seeking clarity in chaos. The village, too, seemed to grasp this, a palpable shift in their collective understanding. Justice wasn't about the spectacle of punishment, but the quiet, painstaking work of uncovering what truly happened. It was a lesson etched into the very stones of the village square that day.